Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Ah, yes. That's the profound question posed by our dear Finrod in the Rings of Power. And let me tell you, this quote isn't just bad dialogue, it's failed poetry. Gloriously, spectacularly failed poetry. It's like the writers thought, hey, let's mix metaphysics, physics, and emotions, and see what kind of Frankenstein's monster of a metaphor we can cook up. Well, mission accomplished, writers, because this is one of the most baffling lines I've ever heard. Let's start with the stone. Apparently, a stone sinks because it sees only downward. Now, I love a good metaphor as much as the next guy, but this is trying way too hard. In good poetry, metaphors work because they connect two concepts in a way that deepens your understanding of both. But here, we're being asked to believe that a literal rock is sinking because it's, too melancholy to float? The metaphor falls flat because it tries to force emotions onto inanimate objects in a way that doesn't make sense. The stone isn't sad, it's just denser than water. Finrod, buddy, this isn't a therapy session for rocks. This kind of metaphor is what happens when you're aiming for poetic depth, but end up with poetic nonsense. Poetry, when it's good, should illuminate a truth. But here, all it illuminates is the fact that the writers were more focused on sounding profound than making sense. They've taken a basic concept, why objects float or sink, and tried to turn it into a philosophical revelation. And the result is a clunky, disjointed mess that doesn't work on any level. It's not insightful. It's not clever. It's just a failed attempt to make physics sound poetic. And let's talk about the ship. The ship feels the darkness, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under. Oh, the ship feels now, does it? Sure, why not? After all, the stone is seeing things, so why shouldn't the ship be emotionally engaged with the water? But here's the problem. Instead of evoking real emotion, this metaphor just makes the ship sound like it's in the middle of an existential crisis. Good poetry should make you feel something. This question mark. It makes me feel like the writers think we're all idiots. The real issue here is that the metaphor collapses under its own weight. The ship doesn't feel anything. It floats because of basic principles of buoyancy. You can dress it up with as many darkness and striving metaphors as you want, but at the end of the day, it's not profound. It's just confusing. Good poetry elevates the subject matter. Bad poetry like this tries to elevate itself and trips over its own self-importance. But the real kicker is the water. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible. Now we're just throwing abstract adjectives around like confetti. Darkness? Vast? Irresistible? It sounds ominous, sure, but it's trying way too hard. Water, in this context, is just water. It's not a metaphor for evil or some cosmic force trying to consume the ship. It's just a natural element. The writers are using grand, poetic language to describe something that doesn't need it. It's like putting a tiara on a garden gnome. It doesn't make the gnome regal. It just looks ridiculous. Let me explain what good poetry does. It uses language economically, and every word serves a purpose. Here, the words are bloated, overdone, and ultimately meaningless. There's no tightness to the language, no subtlety. It's just big, empty phrases trying to sound deep, but without the structure or beauty to support them. So what we've got here is a failed attempt at poetry. It's overwrought, underthought, and ultimately hollow. The writers clearly wanted this moment to feel grand and meaningful, but instead, it's laughable. They've taken something simple, why things float, and tried to make it profound by stuffing it with as much poetic language as they could find. But the result is like an overcooked soufflé, puffed up but empty inside. Next time, writers, if you want to be poetic, maybe start by not forcing metaphors about rocks having feelings and ships waging emotional battles with the ocean. Sometimes a stone sinks because it's just a stone, and sometimes bad poetry sinks because it's just bad writing.